Welcome to the Published Author Podcast, where we help entrepreneurs learn how to write a book and leverage it to grow their business and make an impact. I'm your host, Josh Steimle. Today, our guest is Drew McLellan. Drew has worked in advertising for over 30 years, and started his own agency, McLellan Marketing Group, in 1995. He also owns and runs Agency Management Institute, or AMI. That's how I got connected with him, because I have an agency, and he's the expert on how to run agencies. And through AMI, they offer agency management training, consulting. They facilitate some peer networks for agency owners, and they work with all types of agencies: advertising, digital marketing, media, and PR. He's been featured in or published his own articles in places like the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Entrepreneur, Ad Age, New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, Business Week, and many others. And he's also the host of the Build a Better Agency podcast. And finally, he's the author of 7 books, including Sell with Authority and Secrets of Ad Agency Owners. Drew, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
All right. So you've done a lot of stuff in your career. But take us back, give us the story. Where did you come from? How did you get into advertising and marketing? And then we'll get into your author journey after that.
Yeah, so I went to college to be a psychologist. And so, of course, I had taken a lot of psych classes, and I was sitting with my advisor my junior year, before my junior year of college, sort of planning out what I was going to take. And he said, "Tell me what you want to do with your degree." And I said, "I want to open up a private practice." And he said, "Can I give you some feedback?" And I said, "Sure." And he said, "To be a great psychologist, you have to be able to leave everybody's problems in the room when you step out of the room." And he said, "From observing you in class and knowing a little bit about you and spending some time with you, I think you're going to find that really challenging. I think you're going to want to take all your patients home and fix them.
You care too much."
And he said, "So I want you to think about that." So I went to my parents' house and I said, "You're not going to believe what my advisor said." And they both looked at me and they said, "You carry dog treats in your glove box to pick up stray dogs. Why do you think it would be different for people?" So I went back on Monday and I said, "Okay, now what? If I can't do what my plan was?" And he looked at the classes I had taken on all the electives, and he said, "You've taken a ton of writing classes. Obviously, you're interested in psychology. You've taken a lot of sociology classes. Have you ever thought about advertising?" And honest to Pete, I hadn't ever thought about it, but I wanted to get done with school. So I was like, "Okay, what does that mean?" And he said, "Well, go over and talk to this professor. You have to apply to get into school." So long story short, I ended up getting my undergrad and my graduate degree in advertising. And when I was doing my undergrad work, one of my teachers was an adjunct professor from Gray Advertising. I went to school in Minneapolis. And after she asked me to stay after class, and I thought I was in trouble. And she offered me a job as a writer. Oh. And so that's how I started in the agency business. And then I left, I worked for Gray all through my undergrad and grad. And then I got a job with Y&R. And, I just worked for a couple agencies. And then at the perfect age, what I call it the combination of arrogance and ignorance, I was 30 years old. And I thought, how hard can it be to run an agency? Right?
Yeah, I can do this.
Right. Yeah.
I think this is how all agencies get started,
I think so
right?
too. Right. And so I leapt out on my own. That was in 1995. And knock on wood, it seems to be working. We're 25 this year. And so that was sort of the trajectory. And then as I was running the business, I realized very quickly it's a lot harder than you think it is to run an agency. So I found this organization that was actually the precursor to Agency Management Institute. And under the tutelage of that founder, really learned how to run the business of the business. I was great at the client-facing stuff, but I didn't know how to run a business. Mm-hmm. So fast forward now 15 years, he wants to retire. He wants to sell his business. And he approached me and he said, "I think you're the guy that can take this to the next level." And so I ended up buying the business from him, rebranding it as Agency Management Institute. And that was in 2010. And so now I do both. I run my agency probably about 20% of the time, and I spend about 80% of my time on the AMI side of the business.
Okay. And AMI, I mean, you do events, you do coaching, you do these peer groups, you do a lot of stuff, right?
We do everything from one-on-one to one-to-many events, coaching, online courses, workshops. So Yeah, it's a pretty broad offering. And then of course we have a lot of free resources like the podcast that you mentioned and things like that. And I'm still writing a lot of content for that business.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So you're a writer. How did I assume that led into writing a book? But what was the thought or the genesis for the first book? What was that moment when you said, you know what, I'm going to write a book, or I need to write a book?
Yeah. So the genesis of the first book was as a marketing tool, my agency was producing what we called the Marketing Minute. And so basically it was a little 300, 400 word marketing tip. And this was so long ago that we faxed them to everyone. That's how long ago that was.
Faxes, kids.
Right. I know.
This
You're
used
going to
to
have
be
to
a
Google
thing.
that, kids, right? So anyway, that led to an invitation from my state's business journal to write a weekly column that looked just like the Marketing Minute. And so I did that for a little while. And then the publisher of the business journal said, have you ever thought about taking all of your past columns and turning them into a book? And so that was really the genesis of the book. I hadn't thought about it. All of a sudden I was like, oh, now that would be an easy way to write a book because I've in essence already written the book. I just have to edit them, reorganize them a little bit, and so that was the first book, and that went pretty well. And so the next set of books.
When was that published, more or less?
Oh, gosh, would have been 1997, 98, maybe.
Okay, so this was pre-Amazon, KDP, self-publishing, all that stuff, right? So
yeah.
How did you get that published?
I worked with what I would call a quasi-traditional publisher, a smaller publishing house that only did business publications, and I got a tiny little advance. It was like $5,000.
Did you pitch them, or how did you get connected with them and get the deal?
Yep. So they they were local in the same city where I was from, and I just happened to be meeting with the CEO of that company about something completely unrelated. And she was like, well, what else are you working on, Drew? And I said, oh, I had this crazy idea to write a book. And she was like, so I told her about it because she, of course, was getting the faxes every week and she had seen my column in the paper. And she was like, well, we would publish that book. And I said, oh, okay. Really? Right. I just fell into all of this, right?
Yeah, it's great. Somebody comes along and says, you should write a book with all this content. You're like, I got it done. Publishing deal.
So okay. It was the most backwards way to write a book possible. And again, my goal was never to make a ton of money with my I didn't want to be John Grisham, right? I knew that I was writing the book as a marketing, a 3D marketing tool. And that's exactly what it was. It served me incredibly well. It gets me invited. Even today, it still gets me invited to speak at conferences and all of that. So that was the first book.
All right. I mean, so this is more than 20 years ago, and this book is still generating a return for you.
Yep. And I still give them out like business cards, right? On the agency side of my world, it is still a viable business card. Yep.
Now, when you were writing it, did you have any idea that, hey, this will be a useful tool for the next 20, 25 years? Or did you think, well, this will be good for the next year or two? Or
no. I mean, when I was writing the original content, it was marketing content. From my perspective, marketing content in that I was being helpful. I was teaching the audience how to do something they weren't good at. So it wasn't salesy or anything. So I didn't have to edit anything out because it was really just straight marketing counsel and tips. And then when we put together the book, I thought, oh, this will have a shelf life of a year or two. And
especially with the internet coming out and everything around that time.
Right. Who knew? Right.
And so have you ever updated it, or has it remained evergreen content that's still just as applicable?
Yeah. The purpose of the fax and the column is sort of evergreen marketing tips. So when I went back to actually construct it as a book, anything that I thought wasn't going to be evergreen didn't get in the book, right? So there were a lot of columns that didn't make the cut, but I had so many of them that, I was able to put it, I was able to put plenty in to beef it up to be a book.
It's interesting. That's something I'm sensitive with my writing too. I try to think, what am I including here that might not make sense to people in 10 years?
Right.
I had an experience reading Getting Things Done by Dave Allen, the
Yep.
famous productivity book. In his original version, he's talking about Palm Pilots and PDAs and all this
Right.
stuff. And everything else in the book still applied.
Yep.
But it was just kind of weird to read this and
Yeah.
think, okay, this was obviously written 15
Yeah.
years ago or
Yeah.
something.
It's disconcerting.
And
Yeah.
so he came out with an updated version, and I'm not sure he updated anything other than that he replaced, PDA or Palm Pilot with iPhone, or if he's smart, he just says phone.
Right. Right.
But yeah, it's something that authors often don't think about, first time
Right.
authors, that, hey, like you're mentioning this thing like a fax machine or a
Right.
Palm Pilot or whatever, but that's going to date your book.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I just was judicious about what made the cut.
All right. So now this book was kind of easy for you because you already had the content done and the
Right.
publishing deal fell into your lap.
Yep.
So then when it came time that you wanted to write a second book, were you thinking, hey, it was easy the first time, it'll be easy again? Or what was your thinking as you went into the second book?
Yeah. So the second set of books was Age of Conversation 1, 2, and 3. So I read an article and I shared it. This was back when blogging was just barely a thing. So early 2000s. And it was an article about Harvard was doing this experiment about crowdsourcing content for a book. So I was talking to another marketing blogger who happened to be in Sydney, Australia. We were talking about this article and I said, it would be interesting to see if we could do that.
Mm-hmm.
So back in the day, like 2000, 2005, when there were not that many people blogging, there was probably a subset of 150 marketing bloggers. We all knew each other. We all read each other's content. So we decided we would reach out to see if everybody wanted to contribute a chapter to this book. And so we reached out to everybody and said, hey, we're going to put together this book. If you have always wanted to be an author, but you don't want to write a whole book, you can have a chapter in this book and you can say that you were one of the authors. Here's the theme. And it was really about sort of, imagine, circa 2002, circa 3, 04, 05, like everything was changing with the internet and social media was just coming out. So that was the theme of the first book. And we didn't want to have to worry about royalties and stuff like that. So we said, look, we're going to do it through lulu.com. We're going to self-publish. You can buy as many copies as you want at the author price. But any books that we sell, any money that we make, we're going to donate all the money to Charity Water because we didn't want to have to divvy it up between the authors. Well, 100 some people wrote a chapter for this book. And so that was so popular. Age of Conversation, we didn't call it 1 because we didn't know there was going to be a 2 and a 3, but Age of Conversation 1 then bred Age of Conversation 2 and Age of Conversation 3. And then what it did was that triggered a 4-day event in New York City where we all came together because none of us had physically ever met each other, but we had put these 3 books together. And we donated over $50,000 to Charity Water.
Wow, that's fantastic.
In that initiative. Yeah. So again, I had to write one stinking chapter in each of the books. That was how my next 3 books came to be.
That's great. And I hope the people listening are getting the idea here. There are no rules about how you write the book. You can do whatever you want as long as you get the book in the end. And there are all sorts of different ideas. It doesn't have to be a standard nonfiction book. You can get 100 people involved in crowds. I mean, there's so many different ways to write a book.
I none of my books have I sat down and wrote a book the way everyone thinks you write a book.
So tell us about the next one then. So we're up to number 5 now.
So 5 and 6 were Secrets of Agency Owners. And that was exactly the same thing. So now by then I owned AMI. A bunch of agencies owners want to be authors, but they don't want to actually write a book. So I did the exact same thing we did with Age of Conversation, which is I said, okay, I'm going to give you a theme. If you want to write a chapter of this book, send it to us. And then again, I own an agency. So then we laid it out, we designed it, we self-published it. At that time, we did it through Amazon's self-publishing. So that was the next 2. Again, I wrote a chapter, right? And everybody else contributed. And again, what we did with that money is any money we made, we donated to a charity because I didn't want to have to divide it amongst the authors. So those were the next 2.
Perfect. And then we get to your latest book, your 7th one, which is Selling with Authority.
Yep. Right. So that book is a compilation of how I believe basically agencies, although I think honestly it's for any service industry, how we should be selling today. The internet has changed, has flipped everything. We're no longer the hunter, we're the hunted in the ideal world, that people would come and find us. So that's the premise of the book, is how do you become the sought after authority or expert that people want to hire? So when I knew I wanted to write that book, the idea of sitting down and just writing the book, I honestly, in my head, it was like, I don't have time to do that. So I thought, okay, how do I make myself do this? So I partnered with my co-author, a guy named Stephen Wessner, and we decided to offer a 2-day workshop on the basic principles of this book. And we brought one of his team down with us. We taught it in Orlando, Florida, to about 50 people. And we filmed it, and we were both mic'd. And then we transcribed the entire workshop. And that became the bones of the book. Now, we had to do a lot of rewriting because how you present is very different than how you would write. And we had to augment what we taught with more content. So of all the books I've written, that's the one that probably took me the most writing. And the additional challenge of that was, so we divvied up the chapters, but we wanted the book to be seamless in terms of how it sounded. So actually, one of the toughest parts of that book was he wrote his chapters, I wrote my chapters. And then of the two of us, I'm the writer of the two of us. So then I took all of the chapters and then edited all of them so they sounded like they were coming from one voice. And that was how we created that book. So it started with the transcripts, and then we just basically patchworked what we needed to fill in the blanks that we thought people would have questions about, or where we wanted to go deeper in the book than we had time to go in the workshop. And then that was the book.
That's great. Was this a workshop you only presented once, or did you do it multiple times and refine the content before it started going into the book?
Yeah, we only presented that workshop once. And then after right as the book was coming out last January, we taught what I think of as the postcursor to that book, which is, okay, now that you have the concept, here's the workshop that actually has you execute the book. So then we took them through the book content again, but made them do it along with us as we were teaching it. So,
got it.
Yeah.
Cool. I love it. 7 books, all created through non-traditional means.
Yeah. In honestly, the laziest way possible to write books, right? Yeah.
What's that saying that's attributed to Bill Gates all the time? He didn't actually say it, but he always gets credit for saying that he hires like the laziest person because they'll figure out the best way to get things done.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
there you go. Yeah.
And the fact is, you got it done. You got 7 books done, while a lot of other people are trying to slog through it and write their own book, and they're feeling like, oh, this is so hard to do. Well, maybe you need to take one of Drew's ideas and implement it.
Yeah. There's lots of ways to get it done for sure.
So tell me a little bit more about the response that you've received from these books. What are some of the payoffs you've seen where you've been able to say, because like you said, you're donating all the money from most of these to charity, so you're not making money on the book sales, but these are beneficial to AMI and to your agency.
Yeah.
Are there any instances you can tell us about where you had a specific win where you said, I can track this back to that book? Or how do you know that it worked?
I think it worked is such a wide variety of what that means, right? So it has certainly garnered me speaking gigs at conferences. It has earned clients. It is a credibility tool. It is a great way to connect with somebody who you know isn't ready to hire you yet, but after they read the book, they're going to get a little closer. So in some ways, it's look, you're in kindergarten, you need to be in the 3rd grade before you're ready to work with me individually, but the book will get you from kindergarten to 3rd grade. So there's so many reasons to do the book. It really is I think even in all of the other ways that people can produce content, I think there is a gravitas to being an author that other people afford you. That's different than if you're a podcast host or a fill in the blank, you do some other content. There's something about it, probably because everyone thinks it's super hard. But it does elevate you above your competitors, and it does say something about you and your depth of expertise.
Mm-hmm.
So, I can attribute money to it. I can attribute opportunity to it. I can attribute new relationships to it. So it absolutely is worth the effort. And it is probably one of the best marketing tools for your business that I can think of.
So how do you get the word out there about these books? How do you market these books? You mentioned that you give them out sometimes. What are some other ways that you've succeeded in getting these into the right hands?
Well, in the ideal world, you would have already built an audience of some kind, right? That's the ideal world, that you are already, assuming you're writing a book about your expertise, that you didn't just flip a switch and become the expert in that yesterday, that you probably have done that through your career. And whether it's on LinkedIn or you have an e-newsletter list or whatever it is, but you do have an audience already that finds value in what you say and do. So that's the easiest place to go, right? And there's all kinds of tricks about book launches and getting on Amazon's bestseller list for 3 hours or whatever it is, and all of that's fine. But honestly, I think the easiest and best way is to think of the book as a wedge you can put into a door you're trying to walk through. So whether you're dropping them in the mail to prospects or you are using it as a tool to get on a bunch of podcasts or other shows, which then triggers, I don't know about you, but if I've been on a podcast specifically about the book's content, I can, once that podcast goes live, I can watch the Amazon numbers tick up. So that's one of the easiest ways, is to, again, share your expertise by getting booked into shows. We've never bought ads or done anything like that, although I know some people do that. My goal with the book was to make sure that it didn't cost me money, right? So once I break even financially, then I think the book is a success, because I know it's going to do all the other things that we've been talking about in terms of bringing opportunity. So my book is a moneymaker, not that people pay $19.95 for the book, but that they buy coaching and consulting and come to workshops and join our peer groups and all of that. That rings the cash register in a much more significant way for me than a $20 book.
Right.
I'm always happy to sell the book, but that was never my intention.
Right.
Yeah.
Is there anything specifically you do in the book to lead people into that marketing funnel to coaching and such? Do you mention that in the book? Do you have any specific technique that you use to move people from the book to your services?
Yeah. Today, I don't know why anybody would write a book that doesn't have a reference to some sort of tool or something that people can download on your website at a special URL. And I don't know why anybody would produce a book that doesn't include that. So we had a whole resources section, it was, I don't know, 8 or 15 pages of the book. In the book that we said, look, here are some of the resources, but the minute we print this book, this list is going to be obsolete. So go to this URL to download an updated version of all of these tools. And so we capture email addresses there. And then, of course, they go into, whether they may go to, we list both companies where we have them. So sometimes they go into Steven's funnel, sometimes they come into my funnel. But we both capture their names. And so then we do whatever it is we do in terms of the sales funnel with those folks. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Now, you've told us a lot of the things that you did right with writing your books. What were some of the lessons that you learned along the way, things that you would have done differently if you had only known?
I probably would never, early in my career, I thought the book had to be published by a more traditional publisher, because of the name recognition and all of that. And what I've learned is, in today's world, that's kind of irrelevant. So I would not do that. So while I don't want to be a bazillionaire from my book, I also don't want somebody else to make a bunch of money on my book and me to make, $3 total. So I really like either the self-publishing model or working with somebody who has sort of that hybrid model, where they're more of a partner than a publisher. I wouldn't make that mistake again. I do think there are some interesting challenges when you write a book with someone else. I'm not saying I wouldn't do it again, but I underestimated the complications that come with two different people contributing to a single piece of writing. And the editing, as I mentioned, that was probably the most labor intensive part for me, was going back through the whole book, editing it so it was in one voice, and then working with the editor that we had hired to sort of, polish up the book.
Yeah. Well, speaking about writing with somebody else, anybody who's ever crafted a mission statement, which is super short,
Right.
or the about page for a website, and they're trying to get everybody on the team to agree to that content, that's hard just to get people
Right.
to agree to a sentence or a paragraph. But imagine writing a book with somebody and all the places that you could disagree with things on, or just have differences of opinion on the style or the tone or
Yeah.
all that. So, yeah, it can be a nightmare to have a co-author, but it can also be the best thing ever.
Yeah. I think the book is better than it would have been if I had written it by myself. So I do think the content is stronger. And we didn't really have a lot of disagreements. It just took more time. It just was
Right.
more work.
It's
That's
just
all.
more work.
Yeah.
Yeah. You get more quality, but you give up some control and control of your timeline,
Yeah.
especially.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. Um, so in terms of lessons learned from the process, now, well, I guess the next question really is, what's going to be book number 8? Do you have another book already in mind?
I don't know about you, but for me, I need like a year and a half or 2 years. It's like people who have babies too close together, right? So the book just came out a year ago, and we didn't really get to launch it the way we wanted to because of COVID. So the Audible version of the book is going to be out in the next week or so. So we're going to use that to sort of trigger the launch we would have done a year ago. So the book is for me, the book has probably got another 2 years before I really start thinking about another one. So I don't know yet what it'll be. I suspect, given my history, that it'll have very little forethought, and I'll sort of stumble into it in some way, and I will figure out a way to do it in an unconventional way. So I don't know yet. I'm sure there's another book out there, but I don't know what it is yet.
It kind of becomes addictive.
Yeah, right,
I mean, once you've done it, you're like, well, I did that. That wasn't that bad. I could do that
right.
again.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about how COVID interrupted your plans, because it's interrupted a lot of people's plans, a lot of authors' plans. And
Right.
the thing is, no matter when you launch your book, something can get in the way, something can happen that's completely outside your control. So, how did that go down? And then tell us a little bit more about how you're dealing with that and planning around that.
Yeah, so the book came out in late January. So our plan was to start launching it at the end of February, and so
Perfect timing, huh?
we had just started kind of gearing up, and then COVID hit. And honestly, what happened was when COVID hit, my clients, agency owners, went into complete freak out mode, rightly so, because, a lot of them lost 60 or 70 or 80% of their business overnight with clients calling and saying, pause, or cancel.
Yeah,
And
we saw
so,
this we saw this at my agency. There was one
yeah,
week where my partner called me up and said, "We had 15 clients pause this week." And for us, 15 clients was a lot of
right.
clients.
Yeah,
And I
right.
think we were down 80% in revenue for a couple
Yep,
months or something. And now it's thankfully mostly come back, but it was a scary time. And yeah,
right,
when you get that scared, it's like everything gets paused that you're doing
right,
as an agency too.
right. Well, and for me, imagine I have 250 or so agency owners that I work with on a regular basis, all of them in panic mode, and all of them looking for counsel, a shoulder to cry on, a plan for the future, all of that. So I had to say to Stephen, you know what? I have no bandwidth. I'm on the phone from 7 in the morning till midnight, 7 days a week right now, trying to help all these guys figure it out. And I can't, in good conscience, promote a book right now. I
And
gotta stay
it would
focused
just
on
kind
the
of fall
prize.
flat. It wouldn't,
Right.
it
Right.
wouldn't, I mean, who wants to learn how to sell when you can't even keep any of the clients that you already have? It's
Right. Right. So, that for me, that season of busyness lasted really through the summer until everybody was sort of back on their feet again. And by then, we knew we were going into the studio to record the Audible book. So at that point, it was like, you know what, we're 9 months out. let's just wait till we have the Audible book. That's a good reason to talk about the book again, as opposed to, hey, we should have talked about this last year, but we didn't. So we just decided to wait until that came out. But that was really why. I mean, we were ready to go. And I think you're right. It would have fallen very flat. It would have sounded very tone deaf. I didn't want to be trying to sell anybody anything at that moment. I just wanted to try and be as helpful as I could be. And I didn't really have the bandwidth. So,
yeah. And I think, I mean, the jury's still out on your book and how this kind of relaunch or second launch or late launch will go. But I think we can see from some of your other books, I mean, like the book that you wrote 20 years ago, that's still going strong.
right.
I think we get locked into this mindset that I need to launch my book really fast right now. I need it right now. And if I don't launch it right now, then the moment's gone and I'll miss my window of opportunity. But if we focus on writing a perennial seller like Ryan Holiday advocates, we can write a book that's good for 20 years. And then there's not that rush. And sometimes it's good to have the rush. It pushes you to actually get it done.
Yeah.
But this stressing out over, oh, if I don't launch it within this 3-month window, then all is lost.
Right.
It's just not really the way it is.
Well, and again, if you already have an audience, even without the launch, people start buying the book. They start talking about the book. Obviously, I talked about it on the podcast and other places. So it's not that we didn't sell books, because we have been consistently selling them. I gave away a lot of the books. So for a lot of agency owners, they had to rethink about how they were going to sell their services. So it was easy for me to pop a copy of the book in the mail with a note. So again, it's out there in circulation and people are talking about it. People are leaving great reviews. We just didn't have the sort of traditional expected big build up launch with, all of the emails and all of the stuff. We just didn't do that. And I honestly don't think it hurt the book or the book sales that much at all.
Mm-hmm. So I've run an agency for 20 years. And my first book I wrote because I wanted to help the agency grow. It was purely for the agency, for marketing for the agency. And for you, similar path. Now you work with these hundreds of agency owners. You said a lot of them, they don't want to write or they don't have time to write. They don't want to write a book, but have some of them written books? Have you seen them write books? Do you ever encourage them to write books?
Absolutely. I think I have 3 clients right now who are in the middle of writing their book. And again, some of them doing it themselves, some of them working with a ghostwriter. So lots of variety in the way they're getting that done. And all for the same reason, which is to establish themselves as an authority, which brings the right fit clients to their door and helps them grow their business. They're all doing it for I am not an author as my business. I am an agency owner who also happens to be an author, and the book serves the agency. And I don't think that's agency specific. I think a lot of businesses and business owners can write a book and boost the sales of their business. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is, it's not about only just making sales. It's also about shortening the sales cycle. Mm-hmm. I believe that you handing a prospect a book that you've written shortens the sales cycle. They don't wonder if you know what you're talking about anymore. They assume because you have a book in your hand that you really are the expert that you say you are.
Right. Or on the other side, sometimes they read the book before you even meet them. And then they come to you and say, I read your book. I'm ready to work with you, which is the best. That's the ideal sales cycle when they say, I want a contract. Give me a contract right now.
Yeah. And I think it happens to authors all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen that happen with the book that I wrote for my agency. So this is great, Drew. Is there anything that I'm missing from your experience that would be helpful for agency owners or other entrepreneurs out there in terms of writing their books, getting them out the door, marketing their books? Any other words of wisdom?
I think there are 2 big barriers that keep people from writing a book. 1, I don't have time, and 2, I'm not a great writer. And I think you can overcome both of those. I've proven that you can write a book without sitting down and writing a book in the traditional way. It doesn't have to consume all of your time. And in fact, many people do have a book already written. It's just in pieces like mine was. And 2, if you're not a great writer, but you have great ideas, editors can turn anything into beautiful words. So if you can get your ideas down on paper, somebody can help you edit that book to be something you'd be super proud of. So don't let either of those excuses, if you really want to do this and you think it would be good for your business, don't let either of those excuses get in the way, because they can both be overcome.
Perfect. Where can people find you and learn more about AMI, learn more about your agency and about you?
Yeah, so I'm very easy to find on all the social channels: LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, all of that, Instagram. And my user ID is the same. It's Drew McLellan, and McLellan is McLellan. You can go to agencymanagementinstitute.com and shoot me an email, or you can shoot me an email at drew@agencymanagementinstitute.com. So I am not hard to track down, I don't think.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Drew, for being with us here today on the Published Author Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to spread the word, please give us a 5-star rating review and tell your friends to subscribe too. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else you listen to podcasts. And if you're an entrepreneur interested in writing and publishing a nonfiction book to grow your business and make an impact, visit publishedauthor.com for show notes for this podcast and other free resources.